Hi, I'm Gary, and this is EV Musings, a podcast about renewables, electric vehicles, and things that are interesting to electric vehicle owners. On the show today, we'll be looking at the user side of EV charging and why it's not always optimal.
The EV Musings podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence.
I contacted the individual whose LinkedIn page caused me to start this conversation, and I asked him if he would come onto the show and chat. He was very enthusiastic about it, but he suddenly then went radio silent. Now, I told him I'm doing the episode with or without you, and he still didn't answer. Now, you know who you are. If you are listening to this and you want to write a reply, you know where to reach me. Our main topic of discussion today is the user experience. Now, as a general rule of thumb, I'm quite happy with the charging experience I have on the public network. There have been one or two chargers that haven't worked, or particularly have started charging and then stopped within 2 minutes while I was away using the facilities. But generally, I know how to start and stop chargers. I know which payment methods work best for me, which apps to download, and which units you need to plug in, then authorize, and which you need to authorize and then plug in. But that's a result of many factors, the biggest of which is that I've been doing this for almost 8 years now. I've seen and used all of the major networks across the UK, most of the different bits of hardware, and most of the payment methods. There's not many circumstances where I'm confronted with a situation that I can't deal with, but I know that this isn't always the case for many people, especially people who are new to EV public charging and haven't, perhaps, listened to or watched any of my podcasts that cover this topic. Now, this point was brought home to me recently when I was waiting to meet fellow EV podcaster Liz Allen and Craig Marsden for a day out looking at charger accuracy. You'll remember Craig from last season's episode 277, the charger accuracy episode, where we looked at whether chargers actually deliver what they say they're delivering. Now, I arrived first at our agreed meeting charger to find a young lady in an older Tesla Model S parked at the little 50 kilowatt charger, staring at her phone and looking at the charger screen. After a few moments, it became obvious that she was stuck. So, naturally, I offered my help. Now, it turned out that the car was her brother's. She'd never driven it before. He'd lent it to her. The car was at 1% state of charge, and she had no idea what to do. Now, complicating matters was the fact that this wasn't a Tesla charger, so the car wouldn't automatically charge, and the fact that because it was a Model S, it had a connector that wasn't compatible with the unit without actually having an adapter. It was the NACS standard.ccs. Now, naturally, she couldn't locate the adapter, which meant that we were looking at using the AC connector to slow charge the car enough for her to get home, when she had a literal newborn, 8 days old, in the back seat. Now, under the best of circumstances, this would have been a challenge. But the unit we were using, an ABB unit with both CHAdeMO, CCS and AC connectors on the same unit, had one of those small interface screens with the little icons at one side and a not very intuitive design. It was a very poor user experience. In fact, over the course of the next few minutes, both Craig and I attempted to start the charger on her behalf with a credit card and an RFID card, and the user experience was so bad we were both unsuccessful. Craig tried again with a different card, and things started up eventually. In the parlance of our times, she'd encountered a user experience or UX issue, and this relates to how the system as a whole operates together to either assist or inhibit the user from doing what they need to do. Let's compare and contrast that with an experience I had over the Christmas break. I had my nephews and niece, 21 to 25 years old, in the car on Boxing Day, and we arrived at a Tesla V4 supercharger site open to the general public. I parked at the first unit and told my younger nephew, "Go plug me in, please." Now, he got out, walked to the back of my car, and despite the fact he'd never charged this vehicle before, as it's a recently purchased model for me, nor had he seen or used a V4 supercharger, it took him less than 10 seconds to make the connection, and I started the charge in the app while sitting in the driver's seat. So 2 very different experiences doing the same thing. One very easy, one far more difficult. Now, another example of this outside the world of charging is when you go to a typical non-Amazon website to buy something, and when it comes to paying, you're sent from the website out to a third-party provider to enter your payment details. Now, for a good user experience, what some sites do now is they allow you to pay using your phone either via Google Pay or Apple Pay. You click on the payment link on the website, you authenticate on your phone, and it's done. That's a good user experience. A bad user experience is when you have to manually enter your card details, your expiry date, your security code, alongside your address details, and maybe even have some sort of independent third-party verification. All this before you can pay. Now, the end result is the same. The user journey is very much different. Now, late last year, I had an interesting conversation with someone who worked at a charger manufacturer. They were presenting their latest charger, showed a picture of it, and I added a couple of user experience questions in the comments on the post. In fact, I started it with, I'm going to have a bit of a rant. Now, the response that came back was, shall we say, very much more hardware-focused than user-focused, which got me to thinking, how difficult is it to make a charger that has a good user experience? And as we move forward with this, you'll see that I do a lot of comparison with the way we used to do things with wet fuel dispensing, and there's a reason for that. Let's take a look at the issues I had with this particular charger and how it was explained to me. First off, this isn't a rant about this particular charger. I'm not even going to link to the comment I made or identify the charger brand. But this is more of a general discussion about charger design as a concept rather than the issues with this charger specifically. The first thing I talked about was the card reader. Now, I've been to chargers where there's a card reader by the screen and another card reader a bit lower down. One of these is for RFID cards, such as the ZapMap card, the other for bank payment cards. They're usually marked so you know which is which, but not always. I've also been to chargers where there's one reader only. Regardless of whether I'm using an RFID card or my bank card, I swipe in one place. And which of these processes is better from a user point of view? Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that having a single card reader is a better user experience. There's no confusion about which card goes where, and the process is familiar because everybody has swiped a card or tapped a card to pay for something. As soon as you introduce a second card reader, you're hitting two potential problems. The first is that unless they're directly next to each other, people often won't see the second one, especially if one of them is right next to or just below the screen. And the second issue is that users won't know which card needs to be swiped on which reader. So the on-screen or written instructions need to make this absolutely crystal clear. Now, I've been to Kempower chargers where the RFID reader is directly below the screen, but the payment card reader was located several feet lower on the columns supporting the screen. Very easy to not notice if you don't know what you're looking for. Then I moved on to the screen itself. Now, I'll be totally upfront here and say that I think the ideal charger has no screen at all. You just plug a cable in, and the card deals with everything you plug and charge. And we'll be talking more about plug and charge later in the season. But if we do have to have a screen, does it have to be a tiny little screen? Why are we reduced to trying to read instructions and initiate charges from small, poorly designed screens? In fact, I go so far to say if the screen was well laid out and designed, there's probably no issue with it being small. But if we look at something like an ABB charger and compare it with a Kempower charger, we see a couple of key differences. Both screens are around the same size, but the ABB unit has those little tiny icons down the side of the screen to allow you to select which connector you're using. Now, it's quite easy to miss these or to see them, but not necessarily realize to what they refer. So that creates confusion with the users, and confusion is not good. We will talk about ABB a little later on. But the whole design of the user interface is an area where great improvements can be made. Some are actually quite good. I love the Kempower interface, which allows you to monitor your charge by scanning a QR code on your phone and checking things out on the linked webpage. But some are just not well thought out. They require the user to jump through a set of hoops to start and stop a charge. Now, this is particularly apparent when you're using a single charger that has two EVSEs in it. So an EVSE is a physical device that can charge an EV. On some units, there is a single EVSE. That unit can charge one vehicle at a time. On some chargers, there are two EVSEs, and these can charge two vehicles simultaneously through two separate cables. On some units, there are two cables, but only one EVSE, which means that whoever is there first can charge, and the other cable can't be used at the same time. This often happens with CHAdeMO and CCS connectors on the same unit. But with these units that have two EVSEs, there is still only a single screen to manage them, which means we then get into the next issue I have with the user experience, selecting a cable on the screen. The user usually has to select the connector on the screen, then select the method of payment. Why? If I attach the cable on the left of the unit to my car, that should automatically indicate that I want to use that one. Likewise, if I connect the cable on the right-hand side, why is there a disconnect here when there isn't a disconnect with, say, wet fuel pumps? Once I lift a wet fuel pump from the holster, the system knows that's the one I want to use. It's intuitive and it works. Why is it so different for charging? Well, there will be CPOs out there that say, but you've got to tell it which connector you're using so that it can lock that connector into the charge port and start the handshake process with the car. Fair enough. But if we need to select a connector using a touch screen, how does plug and charge avoid this? Or auto charge? With plug and charge or auto charge, if I connect a single cable to my car, it automatically starts the charge without me needing to tell it I'm using the cable on the right of the charger. Now, this is the same methodology for auto charge, which is the less secure charging process that operates with no user interaction. You plug the cable into your car and it starts connecting. If it can work from plug and charge, it can work for any other method. And once again, this is adding a layer of complexity to a system that is simply poor user experience. Ironically, if I'm using a double-headed AC charger, such as those operated by BP Pulse or PodPoint, I don't have to tell it which device I'm using. I just plug it in and present my payment card, and it knows which of the two EVSEs I'm using, and it starts to charge. So I then went on to discuss the whole area of payment. Now, I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of pre-authorizations and comms with the payment providers, etc. But I do want to look at this and say there's a standard for this. Now, on wet fuel stations, I slide my card into the machine, and it automatically knows I'm paying by card. It knows which card I'm using as well. It doesn't ask me to select, are you paying by card or cash? It knows. This is the user experience I want with a non-plug and charge device. Why is that so difficult? Now, I've talked about this offline, and one argument that's used to justify a lot of this is cost. It'll cost more money to add in this sort of functionality. And I don't necessarily disagree with this, but when you're looking at a unit that can be anything up to £30,000 to buy and even more to install, and CPOs are buying these by the dozen or even higher for some sites, Instavolt Winchester has 44 of them, will the cost of these mods make such a dramatic difference? I wonder if charger designers and CPOs recognize that there are currently suboptimal user experiences that are a direct result of the engineering design aspects of a charger. Do they recognize that Tesla chargers, which have exactly the same engineering design constraints as non-Tesla chargers, don't have these user experience issues? Even using the Tesla app is easier than using an app with other chargers, and the Tesla app isn't designed purely for charging. It's a general Tesla app which just happens to have charging functionality included. So let's take a step back and look at where we are. We have a unit which does everything you would expect an ultra-rapid charger to do. It connects to a car, it accepts payment, and it dispenses electrical energy at various speeds. But as a user coming to this fresh, there are things that would make the process simpler to use. Make the payment process initiative. Give me one place to swipe a card, either payment card or RFID card. If I swipe a bank card, I'm paying by bank card. If I swipe an RFID card, I'm paying by RFID card. Don't make me tell you what I'm going to do before I do it. Once I'm authorized, or even before I'm authorized, if I connect one of two or more cables available on the machine to my charge port, the charger should know that this is the cable I want to use. I mean, it's hardly complicated, is it? If I'm on an Ionity that is generally one cable per unit, it knows which cable I'm at. It also knows when the cable is connected, as it tells you to plug it in and then starts the handshake as soon as you've done that. No pressing a button on this. If I'm at a charger with two cables and one is being used, then by definition, I'm going to be using the other one. If I'm at a circuit control unit that has three possible connectors, then once I plug one of the three in to my car, that will be the one where the connector pins make a circuit, so that must be the one that's been selected, right? Is it really rocket science? In summary, I think it's relatively easy to create an engineered solution that's both practical, secure, and robust. The payment processing works, the screens work, the charger works. But in a lot of cases, the user experience when using these chargers is suboptimal. Now, I'm not telling tales out of school, but I was invited to GridServe's secret development facility about 18 months back, prior to when they launched their app. I was in a little user group that was looking at that. Now, as part of this, we were walked through the engineering labs where I had the opportunity to ask the guys there a few questions, because you know me, I like to ask questions. The first one was why can I walk down a line of GridServe chargers and stop every one of them just by pushing a button on the screen with no authorization? And the answer was, that's the design of the hardware we've chosen. So my follow-up question was, what are you doing to try and stop that happening? And their reply was, and this is not a word of a lie, we've changed the stop button on the screen from red to green so that it matches the other buttons. There's nothing else we can do. To which I replied, yes, there is. Change the hardware to something that's more user-friendly. Now, in a totally unrelated piece of news, I see that the new expansion at the GridServe site at Beaconsfield is going to be using Alpatronic hardware rather than ABB. Good for them. Now, the experience Liz, Craig, and I had with a young lady trying to charge the Tesla showed that there is obviously some issue with how they've designed their particular interface. If 3 relatively knowledgeable EV users had problems getting it to start, then that obviously needs looking at. This issue was brought home to me more recently with a charging issue I encountered on a 7 kilowatt charger at the venue of a conference I attended. The too long didn't read on this was that the charger locked my cable into the unit, and I ended up calling the help desk for, help. Unfortunately, the number I had went through to a company that no longer supported the chargers in questions. It took a while to determine this because the phone signal was bad. When we finally worked out who managed these chargers, I had to find some way of noting down a phone number using the phone I was currently using to call the help desk. Then I called the second help desk, who were very pleasant but not helpful at all. The resolution to the problem was to reboot the charger in which the cable was trapped. This would release the cable and I could continue. But the second help desk had no access to the actual charger and couldn't do anything. They weren't really a help desk, they were a call center who were just raising tickets and passing them on to the engineers, who also, it seems, didn't actually have access to the charger software and would need to come out and physically turn the charger off at the cabinet. This is obviously not ideal under any circumstances, let alone for someone who, unlike me, didn't know what the quick solution was. In fact, I've heard tell of people who carry around specific cabinet keys so that they can unlock the units and power them down to release the cables themselves. But obviously this is not ideal. In fact, it's quite vehemently discouraged for the majority of the public. But it's certainly an option that doesn't leave you at the mercy of the CPO engineers. Now, as prep for this episode, I contacted the individual whose LinkedIn page caused me to start this conversation. And I asked him if he would come onto the show and chat. He was very enthusiastic about it, but he suddenly then went radio silent. Now, I told him I'm doing the episode with or without you, and he still didn't answer. Now, you know who you are. If you are listening to this and you want to write a reply, you know where to reach me. So what are your thoughts on the whole aspect of the charging experience? I'd love to hear any tales of poor user experience at chargers. Not that the charger didn't work or it was blocked, but I found it difficult to understand how to start the charger, or it was confusing, or things like that. Drop me a line at info@evmusings.com or a comment and a like and a subscribe on YouTube if that's where you're watching. Hope you enjoyed listening to today's show.
The EV Musings podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers in the UK, helping you find and pay for public charging with confidence wherever you go. Download ZapMap and you'll get the UK's most comprehensive charging map in your pocket, with a range of filters so you can personalise the map to suit your specific EV model. So it's easy to find the best charge for you whether you're charging on street, en route, or at your destination. You can even see live charger availability and price information in the app, helping you choose your charger at a glance and turn up with total confidence that it will work, it will be available, and it'll be in your budget. Plus, you can pay through the app or with a tap of the ZapMap charging card at thousands of charge points nationwide. No need to download a different app for each charging network. You can download ZapMap for free or check out ZapMap Premium for charging discounts, in-car compatibility, and additional filters.
If you have any thoughts, comments, criticisms, or other general messages to pass on to me, I can be reached at info@evmusings.com. On the socials, I'm on Blue Sky at evmusings.bsky.social. I'm also on Instagram at evmusings, where I post those little short videos and the odd podcast extract regularly. Why not follow me there? Many thanks to everyone who supports me through Patreon on a monthly basis and through coffee.com on an ad hoc basis. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, why not buy me a coffee? Go to coffee.com/evmusings and you can do just that. ko-fi.com/evmusings. Takes Apple Pay too. Regular listeners will know about my 2 ebooks. So you've gone electric, and so you've gone renewable. Now they're 99p each, or equivalent, and you can get them on the Kindle store on Amazon. Now check out the links in the show notes for more information, as well as a link to my regular EV Musings newsletter and associated articles. Now, I've spoke to a few of you, and I know that you're probably driving, walking, jogging, ironing, or sat on the sofa watching this on your phone. But if you can remember and you enjoyed the episode, drop a review in iTunes, please. Like, subscribe, leave a comment on YouTube, because it really helps. If you've reached this part of the podcast and are still listening, thank you. Why not let me know you've got to this point by messaging me at musingsev.bsky.social with the words, putting the user first hashtag if you know, nothing else. Thanks as always to my co-founder, Simon. He's never had an issue at a charger. Completely true. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.